We are here in Iceland. What a spectacular place it is. Such beauty and variety, such an amazing nature with these rugged mountains covered in snow and the steam of the clouds just over there, these grass fields and a river right behind me. What a place of beauty. What a place created by a loving God. What a place outstanding in this world. And I do believe there is no other place like that. You can see it very clearly here in Iceland, a place from construction to destruction. What does it mean? Well, things recently came into existence. And all of a sudden you see the force of nature driving into like a volcanic eruption. And as we traveled here, we saw these vast black fields where the steam came out, representing a catastrophic event. Now, God has given every human being a free will, with the option and possibility to make a decision. And we have decided to record a message of decision here in Iceland. We've asked Dr. Walter Veith to come to Iceland to travel with us to these remote places to record that very important message. And therefore, please listen to this message, the earth between light and darkness.
And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Write, for these words are true and faithful.
As I stand amidst these scenes of devastation and destruction, my mind goes back over the history of this planet, which has seen cycles of devastation and destruction. And if we look at the times in which we are living now, I believe this earth is teetering on the brink. And we should discuss this, and let's talk about it.
Behold, I make all things new. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb.
What an amazing landscape. If we look at these glacial rivers cutting through these valleys, Iceland is unique with all these beautiful waterfalls, rugged terrain, these volcanic structures with this stark blackness, the clouds, the light and the darkness. The contrast is absolutely unbelievable. And yet, there is an element of life, an ambiance that you cannot get anywhere else in the world. And people have lived here for more than 2,000 years. And to think how this place was settled, and that history of Yeshua land, where the Celts moved from Ireland to this place in the time of the Romans to get away from that occupation. And that must have been in the 1st century after Christ. And to imagine that the disciples had managed to spread the gospel over the entire world as it was then known, with the Thomasite Christians being found in India, where the Apostle Thomas had taken the gospel all the way to India. And there are references of the disciples having worked their way all the way to China and their influence to Japan, and all that in their writing, and then to the other side across Europe, reaching many of the tribes and the peoples that was in Europe at that time, and the Celts. And they had adopted this religion, and they were Sabbath keepers. And then they came to this land. And history tells us of this conflict between light and darkness. And what an environment to demonstrate light and darkness. The white rivers coming down from cascades from the mountain, the streams, the white clouds, the stark blackness of the volcanic area. This battle has been raging ever since the time of the fall of man, and it is reaching a climax And very soon, this conflict will become much more dramatic, and every single person will have to make a choice. Either we choose the light, or we choose the darkness. And there was war in heaven. Lucifer, the highest angel in heaven, had rebelled against the government of God. Lucifer, the most exalted cherub, highest amongst the angels, leader of the heavenly choir, had coveted the position of God. He wanted to place his throne higher than the angels. He wanted to sit in the north where the throne of God was. He wanted to take the place of the one who had spoken him into existence. And because God had created Lucifer as near as possible to himself, this is the character of God, his unselfishness coming to the fore in his creation. He reasoned that why should he have a secondary position to the Son of God, who was God in very essence, if he looked exactly the same, and if he had control over the heavenly angels? And why should the rules and the regulations and the laws of heaven apply to him? After all, he was an exalted angel. Surely he, in his own capacity, should be able to determine what is right and what is wrong. Why did he need a higher authority to command him in this matter? And jealousy came up into his heart because the Son of God was taken into the council of God, and he wondered, why was he not in this council? Why was he not included in the council? Why could he not sit on the throne together with God to determine what had to happen in the universe of God? Now, this rebellion didn't come overnight. This had been festering for weeks, months, years, decades, centuries, millennia. We do not know. He suppressed his feelings, but he insinuated them, placing doubt upon the character of God, asking the questions. Did God really say? Asking the question, do you think that was fair? Do you think it is right that exalted beings such as us should be restricted by laws? Aren't we, in our own capacity, capable of deciding between right and wrong? Do we need a babysitter? These were the questions that he placed in the minds of the angels. And as they observed the conditions, and as they saw with their eyes that God received homage and worship, but their great leader did not receive the same homage and worship, they wondered, is there a selfish element towards God? Does he want worship purely for himself and doesn't want to share his glory? Is there a reason? Is he hiding something? And these ideas festered in the minds of the angelic host and eventually led to open warfare. And as this covetousness rose inside of him, he rebelled against the government of God, and there was war in heaven. And Michael, which means the one who is what God is, and his angels, and Lucifer with his angels fought. Lucifer and his angels were thrown out of heaven and banned to this desolate area. 1/3 of the angels, that's millions upon millions upon billions of angels, had sided with the great rebel. 2/3 had stuck to God. And there must have been uncertainty even amongst them, because the arguments that Satan had brought to the fore were convincing enough that 1/3 of the angels had sided with him. What was God to do? He had transgressed the laws of heaven, and God could have, with justice, destroyed him. But then he would have had, for all eternity, a government of fear. Because some of the angels might have thought, well, if you do this, if you transgress God's laws, then God just destroys you. Is this justice? Because did they fully comprehend what the consequences of this rebellion would be? So God, in his wisdom, did not destroy the devil and his angels. He allowed them the leeway to show to the universe and to the unfallen angels that rebellion will eventually lead to total destruction.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which dost weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
The universe was split into two factions, two sides with no mediator. One side claiming one situation, the other claiming another. Who was to be the judge? Who would be neutral in this conflict? Every conflict, if it is to be resolved, requires a neutral arbitrator between the two parties. And so God, in his wisdom, decided to create a new creation, one with the capacity to choose, and one which would decide which of the two parties was the guilty and which one was the innocent.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
The Bible describes the creation week. And the Bible also says that he spoke and it stood fast. Can God really speak all this magnificence into existence by the word? Well, if you go to New Testament times, where the God of heaven became man and dwelt amongst men, and touched the leper, and leprosy disappeared. Where he spoke a word and a withered hand was restored to its original. When people that have been bent over with disease were cured instantly, where the blind were given sight within a moment. Doesn't that tell us that God has the capacity to speak, and it was so? And in the beginning, the Bible says this planet was abusos. It was void. It was stark. There were elements of desolateness.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
And in the midst of this desolateness and darkness, God spoke, and he said, "Let there be light." and light just appeared. Now, God doesn't need a source of light because the Bible says that He Himself is light. And if we look at the components of light and we go into the quantum physics of light, then we can see that everything that exists in this world can emanate from this physical reality. Because the substance, which is at the same time a wave and at the same time appears to be like matter and actually consists of nothing ex nihilo, is in harmony with what the scriptures tell us. And the first thing that mankind needs, that creation needs, that every living creature needs, is light. And then you have the receptors of light right here in front of us. These green pigments that we see in these grasses absorb the light and change the light not only into all the nutrients that this plant requires, but also provides the oxygen that we need. So there's this benevolence, this unselfishness in everything that has been created. And when God said, "Let there be light," He supplied the means for life to flourish. And the waters were there, and God's Spirit hovered over the waters. And this combination is a basic structure for what is needed for the very existence of life. And then God separated the light from the darkness. So God placed the light in the midst of the darkness. Now, since God is light, and this planet was covered in darkness, then it means that God must have withdrawn Himself from this place, and this had become the abode of the fallen angels, steeped in darkness. And He spoke the light into the middle of the darkness, because God cannot tolerate darkness. Where God is, there can be no darkness. And it has a spiritual application as well as a physical application. If we look at the night, there's always something which is sinister, which is associated with the night. The deeds of evil occur mainly in the night, whereas the light dispels them. And the next day, God created the firmament. He created the skies. He created the system that would maintain life. And everything should be safely contained within the environment that He created. And then He spoke the solid ground into existence. And He spoke, and it stood fast. And the plants came forth. The very means to sustain life came first. Always the giving and then the receiving, and the giving and the receiving are part of the character of God, the unselfishness. So that which the plants provided was not only food, but the very means to sustain the atmosphere. And then on the fourth day, He created the lights that were to maintain the light when God gave over this planet eventually to humanity. The greater light and the lesser light. The greater one to rule the day, the lesser one to rule the night. And even in the midst of darkness, there would be light. And then He created the creatures to fill the spaces that He had created. All the creatures of the waters, all the creatures of the sky on the fifth day. And finally, on the sixth day, all the land animals.
God saw all that He had made, and it was very good.
And at the end of the sixth day, he personally became involved, not only through the word, but even the touch. It's interesting that when we go to the New Testament, we also have that element of touch. When a leper came along, he had to shout, "Unclean, unclean," and everybody fled from the leper's presence. But not so with Jesus. He approached the leper and he touched him. And in that touch there is life, and the leprosy fled. And so in the creation of man there was this personal touch. He formed man, and he created him in his image. He first created the male aspect, and then when the male aspect arose from his creative capacity, he showed him the creation. And he made a covenant with him, and he gave him the dominions. And when Adam saw that he was alone, he longed for the companionship that he had seen was built into the animal kingdom. And God put him to sleep, and the scriptures tell us that he formed Eve. Now, this is rather a fascinating concept, because the male has the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. So that determines the masculine factor. But the female has only the X chromosome. So scientifically, the female could not have given rise to the male. Only the male could have given rise to the female, because the male has both the X and the Y chromosome. And he had all the anatomical features that were required by the female as well. And just by the intricacy of the control of the genetic system, the various features of masculinity and femininity could be brought forth. Everything built in. They were designed to be a unit, to be one, to be like God the Father and God the Son in a mini cosmos. And they were to have a personal relationship. But there was a capacity for them to worship. And so there had to be God, the man, and the woman forming a unit. And through this, a lesson was to be given. And the question arises, why did God, at this point, create this new being, this being with freedom of choice, this being in the image of God? Why at this point in history did he choose to do so? Was it an afterthought? Was it a demonstration of his power to the fallen angels? Or was there a deeper meaning? What does it mean to be created in the image of God? Well, an image is something that looks like the original. So the image of God can apply to the physical, but it can also apply to the spiritual, to the character. And it is probable that it was in its totality that both were present in that creation. So when man came forth in the image of God, he had an unfallen, noble character. And he also was in appearance like unto the Son of God. How do we know that? Because the Bible promises in the New Testament that when man is restored to the original beauty from which he came forth from the hand of God, that we will receive a body like unto his glorious body. So here was this magnificent being, far advanced in stature to anything that we see today, noble, and a character which reflected the unselfish benevolence of God. And this also required the fact that he was in the image of God. It also required that he had the capacity to choose, that he had freedom of choice. Because love can never be compelled. Love can only be exhibited and earned if it comes from free choice. After all, what is the use if someone is programmed to love you? That love is of no value. But if someone loves you by choice, then there is value to that love. So the Bible also tells us, besides the fact that God is light, God is also love. And these aspects were challenged by the fallen angels. They said that God could not be a God of benevolence, a God of kindness, a God of love, and then be so harsh as to exclude them from his realm. Then he was just a wrathful deity, exhibiting only justice, but not benevolence and love and forgiveness and kindness. And this was the dilemma. And this dilemma could be solved in this new creation. There's one other aspect. Why did he create them male and female? To no other creation had he ever granted such a privilege. The Bible tells us that the angels of heaven do not procreate. So here he had created, as it were, a mini cosmos, a realm like heaven. And he handed it over to man and gave him dominion over this realm. This must have irked Lucifer beyond our wildest expectations. And not only that, here was a being that would share in the creative capacity of God. Here was a being that would bring forth life And there were lessons to be learned in that. Because if you are responsible for the life that you bring forth, then you will set rules and regulations and boundaries to protect that life, to keep that life in harmony with its environment. If you break that rule, then you have discord, unhappiness, disharmony, destruction. But the question is not completely answered. Why did God deem it necessary to create humanity at the precise time in history when there had been this calamity in heaven? You see, there were two parties. The one party was God and his angels, and Lucifer and his angels. Two parties. But where was the judge? Where was the mediator? Where was the jury to decide who was responsible for this calamity? And this is where God, in his ingenuity, grabs hold of the situation and solves the problem in a most amazing way. You see, a jury has to be impartial. A jury should not be family of those that it has to adjudicate between. And so God, in his wisdom, created a new order that had not known God before and had not known the other side before. And here was an independent jury that could decide as to which of the two had a right representation and which of the two had a false representation. And so mankind was basically created to be that deciding factor. The Bible says, do you not know that you will judge angels? Do you not know that you will sit on the judgment seat together with God? And in the course of history, there have been decisions on both sides of the case. But eventually, God's character will be vindicated, and the jury will testify to that fact. If we look at situations in our life today, if there is a jury that needs to decide an important case, will not the two parties try to influence the jury? Will not the side that feels that it is on the short end of the stick of the jury try to win the jury over to its side? And if that is not possible, is it not even likely that they will try to eliminate the jury? Because after all, the jury has the power to condemn the guilty party. And this is not something that the devil and his angels would want to see happen. And God had to be fair. So the information, just as in any court case today, has to be available to both parties. So if one party has a lawyer and he's dug up information, he is compelled by law to provide that information to the other party so that a defense can be set up. And so this interplay was to take place. And man could choose between the one option or the other option. And so God gave his side of the story, and the devil was given access at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to access the jury as well. And what if he could get the jury to side with him? What if he could get the jury to take the same steps as he had taken, distrusting God, choosing to believe that God is unjust and a liar and is withholding something which should be for their joy and their glory, as he had thought that he was being withheld from the power and glory of the throne to which he believed that he should have access? Well, wouldn't that bring an interesting interplay? Now, Adam and Eve were not created to fall, but they were created with the capacity to fall because they had a freedom of choice. There's another aspect that comes into this interplay. Here was a being that could bring forth life. And was it perhaps a possibility that God had created a being that could choose between God and the other party, and by propagation produce offspring that would eventually take the place of the fallen angels? How much more reason then to target this humanity, to make it fall, so that God's hand would be exposed and his character would be exposed to the entire universe. And if he should choose to forgive them if they fell, well, then shouldn't he forgive the other party as well? These are the thoughts that came into this interplay, and the drama was being created. Now, if Adam and Eve had chosen not to fall, but to accept the situation and to understand the character of God and the benevolence of God and the necessity for rules and regulations, then the drama that subsequently followed on this planet could have been avoided. But God knew that even if they chose against him, the solution would be an everlasting solution. Because eventually, when the choices had been made, there would be enough individuals to attest to the truthfulness and the righteousness of the character of God. And we read that in the book of Revelation, where the redeemed say that you, O God, are just and righteous and worthy of receiving honor and glory and power and the throne and all of these things that Satan had contested. This was the stage for the solution to the great drama that had taken place in heaven. When Adam came forth from the hand of God, when he opened his eyes for the first time, what did he behold? Surely it was the face of God. Here was the greatest evidence that he had come forth from the hand of God. No usurper should have been able to drive a wedge into that relationship and say that you did not come forth from the hand of God, but that one was an impostor, because he had the greatest evidence before him. He opened his eyes and he saw his Creator. When Eve opened her eyes, she not only saw her Creator, but she also saw Adam. And Adam confirmed to her, or must have confirmed to her, that he had come forth from the hand of this Creator. And then, after this first introduction, which, by the way, was given an entire day of association, because on the seventh day, God rested. What did he rest from? Surely not from exhaustion. He rested in his completed creation, because herein was found the solution to the problem that had arisen. And not only that, he had an association. He had a relationship with this new creation. And he must have informed them of his benevolence. He must have informed them why they were created, what the purpose was. And he gave them a display of his character in the surroundings that he had created. And when he left them to explore their creation, how must they have felt when they saw the beauty of the waters that were flooding the areas, the beautiful rivers, the babbling brooks, the water streams, the trees, the flowers, the beauty of the bird life and the animal life. And no animal was scared. There was no fear of man in them, because that came only later. And the animals must have come up to them, and they must have seen this relationship of gentleness and kindness, which you can today only still behold in the eyes of certain animals. Imagine a gentle deer, that softness in those gentle brown eyes. They must have seen something of the character of God. And what must they have felt when they looked into each other's eyes, when they saw that love in that look that exposes the soul, that allows you to look deep into the inner being of humanity. What must that have told them about the character and the love of God? They had no excuse to believe that God was arbitrary or wrathful or unkind in any form or shape or size. They had no excuse. As he watched the pair in their innocence, he must have trembled, because here was God's answer to his rebellion. And if this new creation should choose God's side, then his fate would be sealed. And so he was determined to bring them to his side. How would he do it? He must have had plenty of practice in heaven as he insinuated his ideas to the angels before it came to open warfare. And so he devised the plan, and he thought that he would surely overcome them. But while they were bonding together, it was difficult to drive a wedge between them because love was his greatest obstacle. But when he saw the opportunity that they had separated and that he could work with the woman alone, and after all, the woman was created as a helpmeet, she was the one whom he could perhaps, with his cunning, overpower. He saw his opportunity and he took it. There was no separation between God and man. They were in communion with each other. Angels communicated with Adam and Eve, and they must have spoken to these angelic beings to receive more information as to exactly what had transpired. After all, here was a new creation, a new order of being that had not been associated with any of these factors. And then there were times when they were left alone with each other, just to explore each other and to explore their environment. And on one of these occasions, they were sitting together, and eventually, for some reason or other, they were separated. And Eve, distracted, walked around, and she drifted closer to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she remembered the tree. And when she saw it in the corner of her eye, she was attracted and wanted to know what was the issue around this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she cautiously approached it, and there in the tree was the serpent. It was an unfallen creature. It must have been spectacular. And it spoke. And she was taken aback because no other creature on earth had spoken to her before, other than the angels and God. And here she was intrigued. And she wondered, where did this capacity to speak come from? And who knows, perhaps he was holding one of the fruits. The serpent was being used as a medium. He didn't have this capacity to speak by himself. Perhaps it was the ventriloquist power of the one controlling him that was speaking through him and addressing his gaze to Eve. And she, being interested, looked at him, and almost in a hypnotic state, she was informed of this great capacity that the serpent had achieved by just being associated with the tree. And then the question, did God really say? That's not coming out bluntly and saying God is a liar. That's coming out in the subtlety of the serpent. Did God really say? Just questioning whether God had perhaps withheld something from her. Did he really say that if you eat of this forbidden fruit, you will die? You will surely not die. Because Eve said, yes, God had said that the day we eat of it and the day we touch it, we shall surely die. And his reply was, you will surely not die. The day that you eat of it, you will become like God, and you will be able by yourself to determine what is right and what is wrong, to determine between good and evil. You will have the capacities that God is withholding from you. This God is a deceptive God that has introduced himself to you. He is a usurper. He is a liar. He is withholding that power to which you are capable within yourself, being a glorious being as you are. And intrigued by the possibility of hidden knowledge, hidden powers that had been kept from her, Eve was tempted. And he must have held out the fruit and said, partake and see for yourself. Look at me, I'm alive. Nothing happened to me by being associated with the tree. And she took the fruit because she had distrusted the word of God. Was something being withheld? Was there something that she could aspire to that God was not willing to share with her? And in that touch lies the history of the suffering of this planet. all heaven must have been watching, because here was the opportunity for the other party to approach the jury. Would they take the bait or would they resist? Heaven was watching. There must have been an awesome silence. And when her hand reached out and took the fruit, I can imagine the faces of the angels as they watched in disbelief. Is this possible? Is this really true? Is it possible to convince this new order of being so quickly that God is not what he appeared to be? Surely she wouldn't take the fruit. But she took it and she ate. And the result was that humanity in totality fell. And Satan exulted. He had won the victory over the Son of God. He was going to be the victor in this contest. Because if God was truly a God of kindness and forgiveness and grace, then he would have to forgive Adam and Eve. And if he forgave them, then he must forgive Satan as well. And when she returned to Adam's side, he saw there was something different. The light had probably dissipated. She was still beautiful, but there was another look in her eyes. And he asked her, "Did you partake of the fruit?" And she said, "Yes, it will give you great knowledge and great power." And imagine the feelings he must have had. He now not only had to choose between God and Satan, he now had the additional choice of choosing between God and life and his beloved Eve. And as so many people have done in the course of history, they chose to be associated because of their feeling and not because of their rationality. And he gave up all to be with her, making a covenant, as it were, with death. And God came with a very specific solution, a very specific promise. And he addressed the serpent, and he said, "And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed, and it shall crush thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel."
Look at these worlds. What you see is the creative power of God. And these amazing vast landscapes here in Iceland and everywhere on this planet are a witness to God's love for humanity. You have just seen the earth between light and darkness. I'm very sure many questions were raised and might not be fully answered yet. Beyond this tragic rebellion which has taken place in heaven and led to the fall also of Adam and Eve, there is a wonderful hope. God has given a promise to crush the head of the serpent, and that promise was fulfilled, for God loved the world so much that He gave His one and only Son. Anyone who believes in Him will not die, but will have eternal life. Which means that every human being can make this decision to follow God. For God did not send His Son into the world to judge the world. He sent His Son to save the world through Him. You can also make this decision to follow our Creator and Redeemer Jesus Christ. Eternity is waiting for you.
The great controversy is ended. Sin and sinners are no more. The entire universe is now free from rebellion and hatred. One pulse of harmony and gladness beats through the vast creation. From Him who created all flow life and light and gladness. Throughout the realms of illimitable space, from the minutest atom to the greatest world, all things, animate and inanimate, in their undershadowed beauty and perfect joy, declare that God is love.